And I'd just like to allow 30 or so seconds for us all to settle in. As we do that, we're glad that you're here with us. We have about an hour and 20 minutes to have a discussion with our distinguished panelists. If you visited the website, you are already aware of who our panelists are. We have all of them in, save for one, but we know that she will also be joining us. So I'm sure some of you already have questions and comments as we talk about state surveillance and the effect that is having on democracy in African countries. You can already put your questions and your comments in the queue, not the Q&A, but the chat tab that's at the bottom of many of our device screens. Would like to interact with you, so please use the Q&A, but later on you can raise your hand and we'll be able to come to you for your question or your comment. Again, would like to thank you very much for joining us. And in probably 30 or so seconds, we will be able to start our discussion. Right. Again, greetings to you all. Thank you for making time to be part of this discussion. I use greetings because I know we are not in the same place, so I'm taking note of different time zones. One of our panelists just told us that he is in the United States of America. Therefore, people like me can say I was in the US today on that account. But welcome, welcome, welcome. Today we will be talking about surveillance. And surveillance is the monitoring of behavior, activity, or information for the purpose of information gathering, influencing, or managing the direction of that. Particularly state surveillance refers to measures taken by governments aimed at monitoring and surveilling the activity of the population. Now, with the advancements in technology, the ways of surveilling citizens have increased. Some governments are doing this legally, that is, they have passed laws in order to, back state surveillance, and others are not using laws, or their laws do not give them as much power as they're using. But that is a reality that we have in Africa today. CIPESA has carried out research on the effects of state surveillance on democratic participation in Africa, and we're going to start this panel discussion with sharing of the research findings. Victor will do that on behalf of CIPESA, and that in some way will form the direction of our discussion today. So I'd like to begin with Victor sharing the findings from the research done by CIPESA. Victor, over to you.
Thank you very much, Gabriel, for the opportunity, and it's a pleasure to meet all of you. I'd like to just give an introduction in terms of what this research covered. We sought to assess and review the nature and adverse effects that state surveillance was having on human rights defenders, civil society organizations, activists, journalists, and political opposition leaders and groups in 11 African countries. So we did survey respondents from Cameroon, Ethiopia, Kenya, Mozambique, Nigeria, Rwanda, Tanzania, Tunisia, Uganda, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. The goal was to map out the prevalent forms of surveillance, the laws and policies that aid surveillance, and the impact of state surveillance on the ability of individuals and organizations to organize, mobilize, and engage in democratic processes. And thereafter to look at what kind of coping or mitigation measures they were employing, and subsequently make some recommendations to these organizations in terms of what they could possibly do and what needs to be done to address the surveillance environment in the continent based on our findings. Now, one of the critical aspects that we did find is that governments have employed both physical and digital surveillance in their countries. over many years. What is emerging though is that digital surveillance is becoming more prevalent in terms of its scope, and countries have started employing the use of spyware, drones, video surveillance, as well as social media monitoring, mobile phone location tracking. We've seen instances of hacking of both mobile phones and messaging applications, including email and WhatsApp and those social media applications. So a number of things have emerged in terms of what are the things that are driving or enabling state surveillance. One critical enabler is laws and policies. Our study found that many countries have employed various laws that permit surveillance across the board, which is basically interception of communication. And further, they require intermediaries such as telecommunication companies to facilitate the interception of communication. This includes by requiring them to install specific devices or to require them to ensure that their systems are capable of being intercepted. Secondly, they have laws that stipulate or require mandatory collection of biometric data. We've seen a number of countries with, SIM card, mandatory SIM card registration requirements, these new digital ID programs, and many other programs that are being introduced by governments to collect personal information, including biometric data. And this includes voter registration, bank registration, registration in other countries, driver's licenses. So all these many forms of collection of biometric data. We have seen countries with laws that limit the use of encryption and actually prohibit the use of cryptographic devices or licensing or sale of those type of equipment without registration or licensing. We've seen also laws that require localization of personal data. Basically, any institution that collects information is required to A, keep the information collected for a specific period, or B, keep that information within the country. And lastly, we have seen also laws that grant enforcement agencies, basically state security agencies, very broad search and seizure powers to go and whether it is through cybercrime legislation or terrorism legislation, a number of these laws empower security agencies to dive in and collect and do searches. In some cases, they get exemptions from conducting searches with warrants and therefore conduct searches without warrants. And this is done in an environment where there is very minimal oversight of the surveillance activity. So that's an emerging problem there. In addition to that, we have weak provisions in these laws that provide for enable oversight of the institutions or officials who are conducting surveillance. As a result, the absence of proper controls means that there is very little accountability, there is very little transparency of how surveillance is done, and the institutions or individuals who breach the existing legal framework to conduct surveillance are not brought to book. And therefore, these practices continue. The other aspect is what we found in terms of what is the overall effect on democratic participation. The end result is that once these laws are applied and these investments are actually made to procure surveillance equipment and software, is that we have seen this being directed towards specific groups, basically bloggers, political opposition, media or investigative journalists, civil society activists, and other groups who are seeking to demand for accountability of governments, to express themselves on political issues. So as a result, we've seen that surveillance has curtailed or continues to curtail rights such as freedom of expression, opinion, access to information, and it does so in several ways. With respect to freedom of expression and access to information, what we've seen is that there is increasing self-censorship of individuals online because of fear of the repercussions. We've seen quite a number of individuals reported to us that they no longer can carry out, political discussions, whether it is online or offline. They have to exercise a lot of restraint in how they express themselves. As a result, they're less vocal. They limit their comments. They do not want to engage in debates, and you see this curtails the freedom of expression and the ability to share opinions and ideas. The other aspect is on the right to privacy, especially in communication. We've seen a lot of instances where communication surveillance continues and messages and phone calls are intercepted by state agencies. And as a result, these individuals, you start with your data being collected through SIM card registration, your phone calls being tapped. And so it's difficult for these individuals who are under surveillance to express themselves in these communication devices. So they've had to look for alternative measures or ways to communicate, which has also increased the cost of communication, including purchasing security software, bundles, because you need to use encrypted services. So we can see that the ability to communicate has also been adversely affected. The other effect is on freedom of association and assembly. And here, a number of these groups, political parties, civil society organizations, a lot of their work involves bringing people together, mobilizing, engaging, and assembling. And we've seen that, the effect of surveillance is that some of these groups can no longer meet, they can no longer organize meetings because there is also fear of repercussion. A number of them have been arrested, they've been arbitrarily arrested, detained, persecuted in several instances. Their meetings are disrupted. Their activities are also affected because they cannot organize like every other person. So some of them have resorted to having online meetings, but of course, there are challenges when it comes to having these online meetings because they fear the constant surveillance continues to affect their operations and their work. As a result, also, we've seen the effect on organizations where, the capacity of organizations to continue organizing. In some cases, their activities are disrupted, others have been evicted from their offices by landlords because at the instance of state officials, their relationships with other organizations because of how they've been treated, they've been branded as enemies of the state. So the cost of running these organizations become difficult because of these disruptions, these measures that affect their ability to conduct their work properly. So they feel controlled, they're less free in terms of how they do their work, and therefore it inhibits their ability to continue working on governance issues. Again, at a very personal level, all these individuals under surveillance at the end of the day are human beings. And one of the things that happens is that they feel isolated. There's massive fear. And of course, we all know the challenge of living in fear. You're constantly wondering where is the next damage? Where is the next threat going to come from? And as such, they cannot live normal lives. And it also affects their relationships with their friends and their families, who they have to keep distance from because everybody now fears getting into contact with them. Nobody wants to be seen with them, especially in public. Nobody wants to be associated with them. So you find that the individuals who face surveillance, a number of them end up being isolated from their friends and families. They have to leave, they have to go into hiding, and also they have to disappear from the online space. And these psychological effects have also been noted because the mental toll, such as anxiety, the stress, paranoia, continues to harm and affect them because of the fear of the repercussions. Every day you're receiving threats, you're being intimidated, you're being harassed, you're being, there's that fear of these things being happening or them actually happening, which therefore indicates that, there's actually a challenge within society. So in conclusion, we have suggested a couple of recommendations for consideration by all stakeholders. And I just want to highlight just a few. The first being that we need to review this legislation. The surveillance laws across different countries need to be reviewed so that they are brought into conformity with human rights standards. The parliaments have a very important role, including the judiciary, to continue to provide oversight over surveillance activities, and that their independence, they need to assert their independence much more strongly. Again, individuals and organizations that are working in areas where they find themselves under surveillance need to invest in digital security and also physical security to protect themselves from the threats, but also to be constantly aware. They need to continue monitoring these incidences as they occur and documenting, but also filing strategic litigation cases to challenge surveillance laws. And as much as surveillance continues to be pervasive, so long as human rights standards are being violated, is important for civil society organizations, the media, and all these stakeholders to come together to expose these surveillance mechanisms that continue to happen across the continent, so that there can be a day when which can only be conducted in line with human rights standards. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Victor. I'm very tempted to ask. The Ugandan government is mooting an idea to install tracking devices in cars, motorcycles. And I know that probably this research was done before that idea, government started to push that idea. Did you find this in any African country where, governments are installing devices on vehicles to monitor the movement of citizens?
Yes, Gabriel. In fact, that is one of the biggest, or rather one of the aspects that we found is that a number of countries have invested in surveillance tools and techniques. And one of them is, these devices. We saw instances where governments are using, inserting, tracking devices in watches. They're inserting tracking devices in cars, motorcycles. They're using drones to surveil people's homes from an aerial perspective. They confiscate gadgets and insert tracking devices inside those gadgets. So the measures in terms of stealth devices that they're trying to use to surveil individuals are increasing. And, as that plan is there, you must also remember that they're being aided by CCTV surveillance. And we've seen massive deployment of CCTVs across different countries, especially now with they're coming with facial recognition technology, which can actually zoom in and identify people's faces. So the tracking surveillance arsenal, if you might call it that, is increasing. And that is why I want to highlight the danger of this growing surveillance across the continent.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Victor. Now, I'd just like to introduce our panelists. I'll do that very briefly. We have Tobore, who is an award-winning journalist, and I hope Tobore has been able to join us. All right, I don't know if Tobore has joined, but we also have Nicholas Opio. He's a human rights lawyer, and Executive Director of Chapter 4, Uganda. Ngala Desmond from Defy, Het Now, and Ziada Omari from Jamil Forums. Those are our panelists today. Our panelists were carefully chosen because of their knowledge and expertise on the issues around surveillance, but also because of, for some of them, because of their experience with state surveillance. So even as we, react to these findings, I'd like to start with our panelists sharing with us their personal experiences, because Victor did have a part of that report talking about the effect on, on individuals, personal, the effect of surveillance. So I'll have our panelists start with their personal, experience with state surveillance, even as they go into, sharing for them what stands out from the research and the findings that Victor has shared. I'd like to start with Tobore, if Tobore has been able to join us. I'm not starting with Tobore because of the fact that she's a journalist just like me. That's one of the hats that I wear. All right, I think Tobore is not here. All right. Then I'll go to Nicholas Opio.
Well, Gabriel, thank you very much. And hello to all the other panelists. Thank you for Sepesa for the report. I think it is an important report at a very crucial juncture, especially for our country, Uganda, given the events that have happened in the last couple of months. From the very onset, I think it's important to acknowledge that surveillance can be physical or digital. In my own case, I have suffered both physical surveillance and digital surveillance. Physical surveillance is a form of people following you wherever you go, whether you go to a restaurant, you go to a private meeting. There are people who are assigned to follow you and see what you're doing and see where you're at every moment. Of course, this is very disconcerting. It's extremely uncomfortable to see that somebody is really trailing you everywhere you go. In my case, I've been trailed while I was in Uganda for a very long time. And the way that you know this is that they are not sophisticated about it. They are not covert. Sorry, they are so covert about it. They let you know that they are following you. In one case, I shared a story on my social media platform of a colleague of mine called Victor Uchen. Victor has a very uncanny resemblance with me, but also his name, by some coincidence, is a name for twins in my part of the world. So Opio is the first of the two twins. Uchen is the second. So Victor doesn't only share a twin name with me, but he also looks like me. So at so many occasions at airports, people have mistaken him for me and me for him. But Victor shared with me a story that was very heart-wrenching of people who had been following him for weeks until he confronted them, and they said they thought he was Nicholas Opio. So there's physical surveillance, being tracked, being followed everywhere you go, for whatever reason, keeping account of your work. The second type of surveillance is digital surveillance. And now in my case, it takes some of the forms that have been mentioned, hacking of emails. There have been several attempts to hack my emails, hack our website as an organization. In one instance, they succeeded and took over our website domain, chapter4uganda.com. If you go to that site now, it's a betting website. We've had to move to chapter4uganda.org. The intention was clear, to try and get hold of our data. But you also have things like the use of malware. People send you malwares, suspicious links that if you're not careful, you might certainly click it. They can manipulate names of close friends, say gabrieleguma@gmail.com. Put just a dot at the end of the name, but it looked genuine, like it's an email from Gabriel. But in fact, it's an email sending you malware. So when you click on these links, they then take control of your gadget, whether it's a computer or a phone. So you have to be very careful about these malwares and phishing emails that are being sent. Recently, I got one from the Deputy Attorney General of my country saying it's an important message from the Ministry of Justice in the name of the Deputy Attorney General. And they said, click the link below to read. I almost did click the link, but because I know I know the Deputy Attorney General very well. I picked the phone and called him and said, "Oh, have you sent me an email?" He said, "Oh, absolutely not." We discovered then that that's a malware phishing emails, and so it takes the form of malwares and phishing emails. The last one really is what I see as the role of private companies in enabling surveillance, digital surveillance. Phone companies create dark spots and dark access points for state security agencies to access all your digital footprints if you're using the IPS addresses. In Uganda, MTN has been known for doing that. So private companies, they may not tell you publicly, but do have back access to their systems that allow security agencies to quickly see whose girlfriend you're messaging, whose partner you are consorting with, and so this kind of things do happen. And just to conclude, it was mentioned in the report summary. When I was arrested at the end of last year, all my gadgets were taken. Thankfully for me, I had high-level encryption, and I was able to wipe my documents or wipe my gadgets remotely. And so they've had my Apple gadgets like a brick in their hands, unable to access them. But what they did was they just took my vehicle, is to take the vehicle apart and put tracking devices in the car. It was a brand new car, so we could easily see the attempts the crude way in which they were trying to put these devices. And when my car was returned eventually, we were able to detect these things, sweep them, destroy them, and in fact, dispose of the vehicle. So yes, surveillance is real. It creates a sense of fear. It may not be as upfront as a physical attack where you're beaten, you're arrested, you're harassed, but it's as insidious and eats away at your independence, at your privacy, and at your work gradually until it disables you.
All right. Thank you very much, Nicholas, for sharing that. And as you shared, I remembered a number of civil society, colleagues who have shared with me that after they've had people break into their offices and take their devices, or where the police actually comes and takes their devices. When the devices return, they don't feel safe using those devices because they have no idea what has been put on those devices to, just follow what conversations they're having, interactions they're having using those devices. All right, I'm going to move now to Desmond. And Desmond, please share with us, your experience with state surveillance, if any, and then, your reactions or, what stood out for you from the findings that Victor shared with us. Desmond?
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to all the panelists and to everyone on this Zoom meeting. I'm happy that I'm here today to share not only our perspective from the type of work we do, but also experiences of surveillance. And the first thing I would say is that it's very, very challenging to know that you're discussing and someone is listening or someone is reading what you're saying. It's just like you're in the room and then someone is standing by the door. Even if what you're saying is true, at some point, you feel like the person who is listening and does not want to come out very clearly, but makes you know that he is listening, has a secondary intention. And this, I would fall in line with what we heard earlier from Victor, saying it limits your capacity and ability to communicate. And we've seen instances in which just because you know that the people, we call them here, who work for the government in other capacities, because you don't dare call them people who are surveilling either your phone or your laptop or your computer, just because you know that someone is behind there listening to your conversation. It makes you limit the type of things you actually discuss on the phone. And this actually push many other people to go beyond discussing on phone and then request for physical meetings and the rest. And it can slow your work, because something you just have asked on phone and get the answer in 2-5 minutes, you would have somebody travel 4, 5, 6 hours to come meet so that you can talk with the person physically. And I think this also, it does not mean that even when you talk physically, you can't be trailed, like the experiences we are having we just heard from Nicholas. It means that you have to wait for some time before you can be able to do that. But the most common, which we find nowadays, is malwares. We have links that are sent, be it on WhatsApp, be it by email, that if you're not careful and you click on them, you would find yourself sharing information. Like Nicholas shared, I've had emails that have come from people who I think they're well placed, maybe within government, or they were placed within other civil society organizations. And then just because we always have this security instinct that do not click the link and just check and be sure that the email is coming from the right person. When you start doing these checks, you always discover that this is coming from a different person. And this, again, tells you that what you're doing, you need to be careful. There's a third scenario in which you get a screenshot of part of what you're doing, maybe publicly on the social media, or part of what you're posting from an anonymized number back into your inbox. And this tells you, it's just like, hey, we're watching. And when you want to check this number, maybe you can't find the registration because you're not allowed to know who is sending you, and you're not government. And most of what comes like this is when it becomes very uncomfortable for most especially the government or other persons. I must say that there is another one which we're seeing, which is coming up very gradually. In areas or regions which are prone by conflicts, we see people who call you, who try to tap into your device, your iPad, your computer, to know what type of data you're collecting. Are you collecting data just for your work? Are you collecting data for an organization? And if your entity is having maybe funding from other countries, you need to be very careful, because you could be tagged. I've not personally been tagged as such, but we've had friends and colleagues from different organizations who were tagged as being an eye or an ear for foreign state powers on the ground, and then their devices then get tagged. As to Victor, as to the brief given by Victor, I think it covers what we see all over the countries where maybe we work in. We have in countries or places where there are laws. It's legal to survey what you have to say on phone, and the government says it's right. And one of the justifications given for this is they're trying to limit the spread, or they're trying to limit conflicts that sprang up because many people are communicating with people who they're not supposed to, and at the end of the day, they can be plotting a coup, they can be plotting to attack a community or to attack an individual. So they have to do this. But also, we're having non-methods, which some people might be used to. And I was very happy when Victor mentioned that the breach by telephone companies and internet provider provide services, in which at the back end, they would always give data to these people. And unless somebody calls them up on the internet, or on Twitter and Facebook and other social media handles, it's not going to go down. See, these are not just anecdotal stories we have, but we have this in many different countries. And then there's always been this this argument: should we not survey and allow people to attack other communities from the government side, and then push in for conflicts? And then should we the surveillance would mean also that this is a breach to freedom of expression. You can't maybe talk because you've been looked at. But also it's your privacy, and then you can just push it out to the public. I think it's fair enough, and it represents the views maybe that some of us are seeing from here.
All right, thank you very much, Desmond. And if I may ask, in Cameroon, because you mentioned that some governments are doing this, using laws in Cameroon, have they passed laws that accept the government to do surveillance beyond what is reasonably acceptable?
I would say now they are not such clear rules as such, but what is written in the law is always different from what is being applied on the ground, and most especially when it has to touch political subjects and questions of conflict, we always see a deviation from what is already existing. But also there are laws that are very similar, that does not actually say for sure if it's surveillance or it's just data collection for the state trying to have data and stuff. So it's a midway thing, and I think it's been done like that for policy to be able to run away and move away from most of these. When they're accused of, hey, you're surveilling, they can say, no, this is the way we interpret the law. But yes, until you're faced with that situation and the interpretation of the judge in front of you is given to you, you would never actually know which one or where you stand.
All right. Thank you for sharing that. And as you shared, I remembered something that happened to me. Some people, on this conversation may know Bishop Zach Nerinji here in Uganda. I met with him at a coffee shop. We just bumped into each other. We had a conversation. And the next day he sent me a newspaper, extract. And it really was a transcript of our conversation. My goodness, that Big Brother was watching and listening, and put it in the newspaper. That was quite something. All right, thank you for sharing that. I'd like to encourage us to use, the chat tab for any questions or comments, any reactions to what our panelists are saying. If you would like to share your experiences, please go ahead and share with us in the chat. And in a short while, we will be coming to you if you're able to raise your hand to ask a question or make a comment. I'd like now to invite our next panelist, Ziada, who will also share her experience and, react to the findings that have been shared. Ziada, over to you.
Thank you so much. My personal experience with surveillance things, what I can say is I have not been a victim of surveillance, like direct victim, but I have been around human rights defenders and working at a political discussion forum. I have seen physical surveillance done, digital in terms of interception, monitoring and all that. But the biggest thing I can say is that just the idea that there is a possibility of surveillance is enough for people to give up their civil liberties and limit themselves. Like I remember in 2017, the late president, the then president Magufuli, admitted in public to intercepting Tundu Lissu's phone calls, and just that is enough to inflict fear to citizens on what they can say or what they cannot say. Even in their personal time, their personal phone calls and all that. And what more I can say is that we've seen people being so afraid to a point that we as intermediaries, as Demi forums, we have been through lots of legal trouble, but we have tried our level best to even go to court, to challenge laws and all that, to ensure that we do not give up citizen data. We do not give the government a chance to do surveillance through our site, but still people will be on the forum and like telling each other, do not say this, do not say that. Why are you saying it? Why are you free saying that here? So just the idea that there's a possibility of surveillance is enough for people to limit themselves. Yeah, but also for Tanzania, I can say there is monitoring going on. There was just a case of a student who was expelled from a university just because he gave some views through a WhatsApp group. So he was online and people say like, let's join this WhatsApp group. And then they were there and he said some things. Yeah. So we know that they do monitoring through social media. Also, the Cybercrimes Act of 2015, it says that all internet cafes have to have CCTV cameras installed just in case somebody goes and uses a public facility to give their views. So state surveillance greatly affects people's intellectual capabilities, and it stifles criticism and it weakens opposition to the government. Yeah, but as for the research, I can say that all these findings are what people are dealing with on the day-to-day, and I can just say that as an intermediaries, sometimes you just find yourself at a point that you either have to give in or to stop operations. And so I can understand from the intermediary side, like telecom companies, why they would feel the need, because their sole purpose is to make profits, as opposed to maybe organizations like ours who are like digital rights advocates and all that. Yeah, thank you.
All right, thank you. Just before I move on to somebody else, you did mention, your work with human rights defenders and the experiences that they go through. What does the knowledge of, the fact that governments are actually surveilling, trailing us, what does this mean for the work that human rights defenders do? Because we know human rights defenders are, putting their lives on the line to defend the rights of other people.
Yeah, well, what I can say is that at this point, we're at a point that all these activists, mostly political activists, now have to like seek asylum outside of the country so that they can keep on doing their work through the internet. So we are at that point that people feel that they cannot stay in Tanzania and keep doing their work due to fear, like something might happen to them. Yeah.
All right, thank you. I just remember somebody who, after the last election, was sharing with us her experience. She had to leave the country when she noticed that her activities were being followed by the government. And she did leave the country in the boot of a car. She said she had only seen these in movies. It was strange that, her friends and family had to get her out of the country because of, the fact that the government was listening to her conversations during the election period. And all she was doing was being a vigilant, citizen. I'd like to go to Nicholas Opio. The magic words that are used sometimes, national interest, national security, as justifications for surveillance. Legally, what does this mean? Is this an open check for the government to, to do surveillance?
Well, thank you. Thank you, Gabriel. You are indeed right that the refrain that many state agents use for justifying their actions is national security, and public order and stuff like that. These are used very liberally and sometimes used, I think, in my view, wrongly. For proper guidance on what national security means, I can only point you to what is called the Siracusa Principles that defines the the remit of limitations of fundamental freedoms that states can apply while interpreting the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. The gist of that, and if I can paraphrase, is that national security does not equate to regime security. Rather, the national security are those things that threaten the corporate existence of a state, okay? And doesn't include, things like a political disagreement, local dissent, which is a right for people to have. And so states have used national security selfishly, and in my view, perversely, to provide a justification for their actions. And they know too well that once they say national security, people will always be hesitant to question them. The other term that they use in Uganda, I don't know about the other countries very well, is that we have intelligence. We have intelligence. The intelligence services have picked up information. Doesn't matter whether the intelligence is intelligent or intelligible. They can just do it. I do recall that in a while back we had a police chief who would address the press and say the intelligence has picked up. They know exactly the time an opposition party took somebody for training in particular countries, in Somalia. They know when that person went for training, that person had the training, that person came back in the country, and that person is now plotting terrorist activities in the country. They would know all of this precisely, with such precision, and they would tell the press this is what they know. But in fact, it's all a bluff. There was absolutely nothing. So they used the term intelligence as a cover. I think that if we are going to have any headway, we are going to have to challenge government and the courts to be able to provide a framework for examining what we call intelligence or what we call national security. It cannot be a carte blanche, cannot be a blank check. There has to be. For example, in the US, in the Senate, the Defense Committee of the Senate has particular rules for examining classified documents in order to perform oversight. There's a basement room that is sealed. You go there, you sign the non-disclosure. It's for your eyes only, no phones allowed. There has to be a system in which the actions of our intelligence services can be put to scrutiny, either by the courts or by a legislative process, like it is done in other countries. The security chiefs in Uganda go to Parliament and tell Parliament, yes, we have safe houses. You can't come to it. You can't see it. You are not going to see it. And Parliament is helpless. These are houses in which people are tortured and kept for a long time incommunicado. And so we have to have a process for some form of scrutiny. The law in Uganda allows the Human Rights Commission to visit these places of detention, whether it is gazetted or not gazetted. But the Human Rights Commission has also become like an NGO, lamenting in public because they can't access these places. The legal provisions are being perverted for a political end. And so national security intelligence is not a carte blanche. There are limitations, and that we must translate these limitations in practice if we are to push back successfully.
All right. And sometimes when the Uganda Human Rights Commission is allowed to visit these places, they should give advance notice so that, the place can be cleaned up and prepared for them to come and, find it neat. All right. Because, we will remove that from the recording because these are not my views on where government of Uganda is doing some of these things. Anyway, on a more serious note, would like to segue from what Nicholas has said. Let's go into the recommendations. Some of the recommendations touch on, legislative reform, more oversight that Nicholas has just spoken about, independence of institutions. Are there, any more recommendations from the panelists, even from you, the participants? You can put those in the chat or the Q&A. We will look at those recommendations. I'd like to start with Desmond on the recommendations, and if there's anything that you would add to the list that was shared by Victor.
Thank you very much. I think the first recommendation I would have to give is education around digital rights. We need to understand or make our policy governments to understand that digital rights are human rights. A breach to these rights could lead to even a greater problem than what we're trying to solve. I can still vividly remember, and I think of this case in Bamenda, where 2 students are still in jail, sentenced to 10 years, because they shared a joke about Boko Haram on WhatsApp, and they were all picked, and then they've been sentenced to, I think, 10 years in jail. Governments need to know most of these needs to be respected, but also to be the devil's advocate here, which I am not. All of us need to understand that it's important that we use the internet responsibly. I think what is pushing more governments, I think, to convey, I think we don't use the internet so very responsibly. I insist they think, not that we don't use it that way. And I think it's our place to say, yes, government needs to understand our, also governments, we also have a responsibility to use the internet responsibly, because some governments keep saying we're not using it responsibly, which is not true. I must insist, don't get me wrong. No one should say that I said we're not using the internet right. We're using it right. We're using it to push for change. And it's only when they get uncomfortable that they're going to go into, get into our inbox. They're going to get into our emails to try to find what is happening around. But also, we believe that in the responsible use of the internet, be it through emailing calls, different apps that we're using, we should be able to affect a positive change. And I'm happy that CPES, I put out this report that is very clear and that says what is wrong and what is right. And then policy can or should be able to take it up and use it. Back to you.
Yes, you're very clear. Thank you very much. Let me go to Ziada on recommendations. And I'd just like to encourage the panelists. There are questions in the Q&A tab. If you could respond to those. I'm going to ask some of them out loud for us to react to, but if you could go there and type an answer. We have questions from Shatu and Nkurunziza. All right, Ziada?
Okay, so my recommendations, the first would be digital security or even physical security trainings, especially for people who are in danger, like the human rights defenders, investigative journalists. I saw one of the questions is asking, like, how can you know that you are under surveillance? So how can you suspect that you're a victim of digital surveillance? So I think these trainings can help that, but also challenging the laws, like asking for legal reforms. For example, is suspicion of a crime just enough grounds for gaining access to somebody's communication? And also pushing for privacy laws for countries like, I can speak for Tanzania, we do not have a law that protects people's privacy, data protection. So pushing for enactment of these laws and ensuring that these laws are for protecting the needs of the people and are not used as further tools to keep surveilling people. Yes.
Yeah, because we've seen that where laws are passed, and the name of the law actually and the objective says that they're going to protect the, digital rights of citizens, and the same law is used to take those rights away. All right, Nicholas Opio, private companies and private actors that we can even call accomplices, giving government, back-end access. And how do you deal with those? Because I'm your client, I'm paying for a service. And, the fine print says that, my information is secure, it's private, and yet government is being given access without my knowledge.
Look, Gabriel, a couple of things are important in respect to private companies. And I've seen Emmanuel asking in the chat about MT and Airtel. First, from a business perspective, these companies are adverse to negative publicity. If you have evidence that this is being done, expose these companies and make sure that the public knows what they're doing. It's not good business for them to be conniving with the criminal elements in the state to share unlawfully customers' data. So if you know them first, as a first basic approach, expose them, because that exposure doesn't make good business sense for them. Their customers will know what they're doing and they may lose customers. Their investors might know what they're doing and they might hold them to account. The second thing is rather more complicated, that these companies are part of multinational corporations. Oftentimes, they even have double standards. In the countries where they are headquartered or domiciled or registered, or where their parent companies are registered or work, they have stricter laws on privacy. They would never do that in those countries. But when they come to African countries, they're involved in all manners of illegalities for short-term commercial interest. And so we have to identify those companies. Some of them are listed on the stock exchanges in London, in New York, and be able to put pressure on their investors and shareholders so that these companies live by the standards that are held internationally, because there are human rights and business standards already set by the UN, and companies ought to be invited to participate in them, to follow them. The last one is that we've got to make this costly, because if a company gets away with it, it is easy. They can then do it for anyone else. I can tell you, for example, that getting a court order to come and seize your gadgets, Gabriel, in the courts of law in Uganda is done as a matter of formality. It is pro forma. The lowest ranking police officer can swear a one-page affidavit that has no evidence and go to a magistrate, and a such order is given without you being heard, without the phone companies being heard. We must insist on a fully fledged hearing in a court of law where the phone companies are allowed to defend themselves and make a case if they have one, and the person, the subject of the search and surveillance orders, has a chance to be heard why these orders shouldn't be granted. But cannot be granted just like you're going into a KFC shop to pick some chicken. You pay, get out, and get out. So we have to provide a process that is inter-party, that is exhaustive, that follows due process, allows for a chance of hearing, because many times these orders are obtained without cause, without factual basis, without any evidence. If we can do that, then we can perhaps hold those companies to account in ways that can be helpful.
All
Thank
right.
you, Gabriel.
Thank you, Nicholas. And I believe you've responded to Rose's question as well, because Rose was asking what can internet users do where their rights are infringed by internet providers. All right. What happens if these are not domestic, if it's not in your country?
Well, again, there are still mechanisms for acting extraterritorially. There are many organizations that are based in those countries that can help you to file a case. In fact, it's even easier if it is based, say, in Europe or in the US, for digital rights organizations to challenge these companies, on your behalf. I've had cases of cloud storage service providers allowing access to our passwords that are in their cloud space. And when this matter was brought through the Open Justice Initiative run by the Open Society Foundation in San Francisco, the company was very quick to take remedial measures to avoid negative exposure. And so, yeah, there are companies and organizations that are domiciled in those countries that can help you to file a case in those countries. It's much easier. I can tell you, for example, when the Ugandan government wanted to force Facebook to disclose the identity of TVO, an online account that was critical of government, when Facebook went to court in Ireland, we were part of that process. And that court process was very transparent and clear. And they just simply refused the order and says, this would violate human rights. The person will be subjected to danger. So there are processes in other countries that can be used to stop state surveillance.
All right, thank you, Nicholas. Rose and Emmanuel, I believe your questions have been responded to. And Rose reminds us that human rights, digital rights are human rights. Victor, I hope you're still with us.
Yes.
All right, I'm putting this one to you because it has aspects of, probably some things that you were not able to share with us from the findings that could be helpful in responding to this. This is a question from Shatu. She says, it goes this way. I wish to find out if surveillance is not another method of cracking down on the freedom of expression and association of individuals and groups or persons. Should governments not take out time to erect digital inclusive and literacy structures to teach their citizens the basics in the use of the gadgets they import than spend time enacting laws to punish, I believe, those who at some point don't even understand some of the functions, the functionalities of those gadgets. And you find instances where governments are actually taking a lead in advising their citizens on how they can enjoy better their digital rights, because many countries actually have government agencies that have been set up for that exact purpose.
Yes, Gabriel, and I do agree with her that the contradiction we have at the moment is that quite a number of governments across the continent are advancing ICT policies, ICT strategies, and hailing, smart cities and how ICTs can be the tool that is going to transform the lives of people in the continent and citizens within their countries. And the sad thing is that the same tools that are being advanced as progressive to improve the lives of the people are also being used at the same time to curtail the enjoyment of fundamental rights and freedoms. And that's the unfortunate contradiction that, we, on the one hand, we are saying technology is good, mobile phones are good, we need to expand penetration of access to, internet and, mobile and ICT devices. And on the other hand, we are saying, give us personal information so that we can advance our surveillance. So I think I agree that it is important that ICTs are seen as tools. We need to bring everybody on board. We need to bridge the digital divide that exists across our communities, across our continent, so that people can actually harness the power of ICTs for their own individual development, and more importantly, to advance the realization of their fundamental rights and freedoms to expression, association, and all these rights, whether it's on social media or other, forms of other spaces in the internet. Now we can do remote work, we can learn, we can pursue education. There are so many benefits that come with the internet. But what we are seeing is that the political interests of specific individuals who are within government, they are advancing those political interests to the detriment of society as a whole. And therefore, we need to make noise and shift the narrative so that people can actually benefit from ICTs, but also the instances and the opportunities for conducting surveillance are actually limited to only those that are very specific to cases. If I just might add something to the previous conversation, is just to add that we are seeing these cybercrime laws, terrorism laws being used, against people who are just doing their work. Ordinary citizens who are just commenting on matters of public interest, commenting on political processes. These are not criminals. And it is important to start pushing back to ensure that these laws and practices are not being used to target, ordinary citizens just expressing their rights. I think it's important to mention that, the respect for human rights is not a suggestion. And states should, by default, respect fundamental rights and not treat them as optional, that we can derogate from them as and when.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. Just before you mute, continental and regional, mechanisms. In the research, do you find any that could, help in these instances? Because certain times, yes, you put your government to task, and you basically don't have the clout to see that through. But we've seen our governments react to regional and continental bodies and mechanisms, even groupings.
Yes, I think there are various ways in which this growing surveillance can be challenged. First of all, I think at the national level, we must start from home. Charity begins at home by challenging these laws and making the case that these laws are bad. They're bad for business, and these practices are wrong and should not be encouraged. Number two, there exists regional courts. Within the EAC, we have the East Africa Court of Justice, we have the East Africa Legislative Assembly. These are institutions which we need to start engaging with to, whether we are taking cases to the courts or taking proposals for legislative amendments at that level, so that they can be used to ensure that these things do not happen. At the Africa-wide, and of course, there are other regional economic communities, ECOWAS, SADC, COMESA. Those are spaces where these discussions need to be brought. And of course, at the Africa regional level, we have the AU bodies, we have the African Court on Human and People Rights and the African Commission on Human and People Rights. These are institutions, including the special mechanisms on freedom of expression, on freedom of association, who can be engaged to highlight the of surveillance across various countries, to engage with the governments to actually start taking seriously the obligations to protect fundamental rights and freedoms. And I think lastly is these intermediaries, whether nationally or locally, need to start pushing back to be challenged, like Nicholas was saying, to start hitting them where it matters. If they don't respect your privacy, then they shouldn't get your business. And I think people need to start putting their money where their privacy is protected. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Desmond, I'd like you to respond or comment, basically react to a comment here from Derek. Derek says, in our contemporary world, we can sadly say surveillance has become a necessary evil we have to do with. This explains why we have laws in this domain. Though the availability of laws to protect our personal data and surveillance has never been a problem, and the effect of this on us is obvious. The real problem lies in the level of the application of these laws. The comment just moved. Yes, we always see double standards based on the actors involved. For example, in Cameroon, I hadn't seen this part. For example, in Cameroon, we have the law on cybersecurity and cyber criminality, an interesting law which, in my opinion, suffers from its applicability. Yes, there's one over to you.
Yeah, I think there are two folds. The first thing is, I would say, is that has been echoed here already. We live in a contemporary world where surveillance would continue. So one of the key things we should do is to get journalists, civil rights activists, people working in the NGO world, and even just the public to know basic tech skills, just to be able to protect themselves. There is going to be definitely no day in which politics is going to just sit down and fold their arms and then look at us and say, okay, fine, we're not going to survey. So you need to do that. And like we had earlier speakers say, to be able to identify when it already starts, when your phone, your computer has been bugged, you should be able to know and take appropriate measures. The second thing is about the laws. I think the laws suffer double standards, most especially in Cameroon. I'm happy that comment is coming from someone who knows the terrain too in Cameroon as far as these rights are concerned very well. It suffers double standards because of one, it lies in the at the level of interpretation. And I think we had, I think Nicholas was talking about a police officer can get just with a flimsy excuse, with no support, you've not been heard, and then they could get a warrant to get your gadget. But we also see the interpretation suffers, but also what we do need, which I see some hubs trying to do that as much as possible, is a law on data security. Because since there are no laws that exist on us protecting our own data, and once this happens, they're taken from you. I'll give you an example in the Northwest and Southwest, and I'm happy I'm seeing people joining from those two English regions, which have been rocked by crisis for the past 4 years now. There is something that happens quite often, and we're not quite very. I'm not quite very happy with it. You could be stopped by security operatives, and your phone is taken for no excuse. You just have to maybe be a little bit bushy because you decided not to shave and you were coding, and then your phone will be taken away from you. You just also need to look very, very, very handsome, like Gabriel is looking, and then they look at you and say, "Hey, it seems as if you." So since there is no law to say, "Look, personal data should be protected per se," this can happen and go without anybody challenging it, because you go back to court. It's going to be classified under a different type of offense because such laws do not exist. And yes, Derek, thank you. I think I share that view as well. The laws of standards.
Thank you very much, Desmond. The CPESA team, I'm going to need a recording of this video because Desmond just called me handsome. Earlier, Nicholas said I am his close friend. This information is valuable for my wife. So please, will you just send me the video? All right, on a more serious note, Arthur Tumwesije says in China, many other countries, everyone is being monitored using CCTV and tracking devices. I realize that somebody in the chat, the Victor, responds to that and says, Arthur, just because China and other countries are doing it doesn't make it right. Let's continue to use the chat and the Q&A. Panelists, please respond to the questions in the Q&A. Just type your answer, and thank you very much, Ziada, for responding to that question. In fact, as we come to the way forward, I'd like each of the panelists to share with us very quickly, some of the things that a person can look out for to know that they're being surveilled. I will start with Ziada. I'm actually going to come to each of the panelists on this one, and then we'll come for your way forward after. Ziada?
Well, it is not easy to know that you've been surveilled. For example, if for the case of physical surveillance, you can't unless you are a very self-aware person, aware of your environment and all that. But I can speak for digital surveillance. There are things that you can look out for, especially maybe if you're using your phone. I know there are some sounds that you know that I'm being surveilled here. For example, I know for Tanzania, like there's some a number of beeps that when you pick a call or when you make a phone call, there's a number of beeps that you hear, that this phone call is being recorded. Also, there are applications for that to just check your phone if there's malware and all that. And also if phone malfunctions like unreasonable data usage also. But as I've said in my answer, the best way is to prevent all of this. The best way is preventive, like to ensure that since like when you get your device, you secure it, you make sure that you have put enough security mechanisms. I remember Nicholas said that they took his phone, but he had mechanisms to protect it. So the best way is to prevent all of this.
All right.
Yeah.
Prevention, better than cure usually. All right, Nicholas?
Yeah, so first of all, there are softwares that you can install on your gadgets. They can tell you if you're being tracked or surveyed. Look out for these softwares. I have, for example, a software called F-Secure that is able to see whether I'm being tracked, either for just advertising purposes online or simply for other reasons, and is able to block or to alert you of harmful attempts, so get the softwares, and they are open source, but they are also premium versions. If you can buy a premium version of those softwares, because it helps you to see if you're being surveilled. For harmful attempts at hacking at your emails, two-factor authentications are normally very useful because they can alert you on the other device that someone is trying to access your gadget. If you can, in fact, you should have a two-factor authentication for all your passwords online, because they can help you. I use, for example, in fact, I have a two-factor authentication as well as a third option, which has a three-process layer of protection, what is called a Google security key. This is still a rare thing because it's not given out publicly by Google, but I have one called, it's a Google security key. You can use it as a key for opening a door of a car. It has multiple layers of protection. And if somebody's trying to hack into your account, they can quickly block it and notify you. So just get the basics right. The other thing to know if you're being surveilled is you've got to understand how, for example, phone systems and networks operate. If you are, like Zaida said, if your calls tend to start with a clicking sound, sometimes you hear noise in the background. You have delayed voice transmissions. It is likely that somebody else is listening in on your device. And you've got to, you have to be alert to these kind of things. I know many people make phone calls and hold the phone away to see until the person has speak to begin to, but the process between a phone ringing and a phone being picked, you can pick so much stuff in between there, and you have to be attentive. If you are, you will know that your phone is being tapped into. For physical surveillance, in my case, I have cameras all over my car. I have a dashboard camera that has a rear and front view of my car. I'm able to see on my dashboard, what's happening around me. Sometimes I review them at the end of the day, and you can begin to see a pattern if you're being trailed. Similar people, wherever you go, you see them. You see them on the dashboard. And so you've got to, and these are very cheap Amazon, available, stuff. Of course, you can get the premium version that stores things on the cloud, transmits to response systems. So you have to get this kind of things. It does help. A sense of self-awareness, if you can't afford these devices, don't take anything for granted. Be self-aware always.
Excellent. Desmond?
And use an iPhone if you can. Yeah, iPhones are stronger.
Nicholas, you had to chip that one in.
It's important.
You're always on my case. All right. Desmond?
Okay, thank you. I think Nicholas has highlighted two of the points I had to do. There's a scenario in which we do have, I would just add, when your calls become, the volume of the call start to drop, and then you check your device, and at times the correspondent checks his device, and then you see all of you on the same, the volumes are good, and then you should be careful. The times in which you're calling somebody, then has a beep, or it slows, you have like echoes and like there are interference. But when the volumes drop as well, you need to be very, very careful. He talked about authentication. I think I do that for all my apps. You can't get into, for instance, you can't get to my Facebook even if you access my phone. Many people would just let it go, and then you drop your phone to wash your hands, then somebody can do that. And some of these officials do it manually. Somebody picks your device and actually logs in and does and send and then would send the information to the other device. But also, don't let it happen, because when you start running with them, they have resources more than you. They have way more resources more than you, and that is the job. And your job is not to keep yourself secured and safe online, but rather your own job is to be doing your own job, to be doing what you have to be doing. So I think like the other speaker said, you need to make sure that they don't happen. Get at these basic tech skills that can prevent this from happening. And be careful with the way you share passwords. There's some people who take who give passwords that are very easy to guess. Somebody would say, I don't know, would take the name of the organization and put with the country code and stuff like that. Some would use their children's, their wives, and then these people have all this data. Somebody can just sit somewhere and drinking a beer and guess your password, and once it's locked into your device, it becomes very difficult. You can actually change the recovery device, and each time you have a problem, you would have to lose that account.
Well, thank you very much. We're actually going to leave it there because of time, but I realized that as we were sharing the tips, we did share our way forward, and it was shared earlier on when we were talking about recommendations. Would like to thank each of our panelists very much for sharing with us their knowledge. I would like to thank CPESA for the report. We hope it can be shared with all participants. And of course, the participants, thank you for your participation in the chat and in the Q&A. You made the discussion very vibrant. Wherever you are, I'd like to say goodbye and well, stay safe. Bye-bye. God bless you.